The Story of King Arthur and His Knights by Howard Pyle. Part 3. The Winning of a Queen. So, having told you how King Arthur obtained that very excellent sword Excalibur for a weapon of defense, I shall now presently recount sundry other noble and knightly adventures, whereby he won for himself a most beautiful and gentle lady for his queen. For, though all the world is very well acquainted with the renown of that perfectly gracious dame, the Lady Guinevere, yet I do not think that the whole story of those adventures by which King Arthur won her good favour have ever yet been told. So, as the matter hereinafter to be related contains not only the narrative of that affair, but also the account of a certain enchanted disguise which King Arthur assumed for his very purposes, as well as sundry adventures of very knightly daring which he undertook, I have great hope that he who reads what I have written shall find it both an agreeable and entertaining history. Chapter 1st. How King Arthur went to Tagalon with 4 of his court, and how he disguised himself for a certain purpose. Now, upon a certain day, King Arthur proclaimed a high feast, which was held at Carlion upon Usk. Many noble guests were bidden, and an exceedingly splendid court gathered at the king's castle. For at that feast there sat 7 kings and 5 queens in royal state, and there were high lords and beautiful ladies of degree, to the number of 67. And there were a multitude of those famous knights of the king's court who all reckoned the most renowned in arms in all of Christendom. And, of all this great gathering of kings, lords, and knights, not one man looked askance at his neighbour, but all were united in good fellowship. Wherefore, when the young king looked about him, and beheld such peace and amity among all these noble lords where aforetime had been discovered in ill regard, "Sirs," quoth he to himself, "it is wonderful how this reign of mine hath knit man together in kindness and good fellowship." And because of such thoughts as these, his spirit took wings like unto a bird and sang within him. Now, while the king sat thus at feast, lo, there came a herald messenger from the west country. And the herald came and stood before the king, and said, "Greetings to thee, King Arthur." Then the king said, "Speak, and tell me, what is thy message?" To which the herald made reply, "I have come from King Leodegrance of Camelot, who is in sore trouble. For thus it is, his enemy and thine enemy, King Rens of North Wales, he who at one time in contempt of thee commanded thee to send him thy beard or to trim his mantle, doth make sundry demands of my master King Leodegrance, which demands King Leodegrance is altogether loath to fulfill. And King Rens of North Wales threatened to bring war into Camelot because King Leodegrance doth not immediately fulfill those demands. Now King Leodegrance hath no such array of knights and armed men as he one time had gathered about him for to defend his kingdom against assault. For, since thou and thy majesty hath brought peace to this realm, and hath reduced the power of all those kings under thee, those knights who once made the court of King Leodegrance so famous have gone elsewhere for to seek better opportunities, for their great valour and prowess at arms than his peaceful court may afford. Wherefore, my master King Leodegrance doth beseech aid of thee, who art his king and overlord." To these things that the herald messenger said, King Arthur and all that court that feasted with him listened in entire silence, and the king's countenance, which erstwhiles had been expanded with cheerfulness, became overcast and dark with anger. "Ha!" he cried, "this is verily no good news that thou hast brought hither to our feast. Now I will give what aid I am able to thy master, King Leodegrance, in this extremity, and that right speedily. But tell me, Sir Herald, what things are they that King Rens demandeth of thy master?" "That I will tell you, my lord," quoth the herald messenger. "Firstly, King Rens maketh demand upon my master of a great part of those lands of Camelot that march upon the borders of North Wales. Secondly, he maketh demand that the Lady Guinevere, the king's daughter, be delivered in marriage unto Duke Mordaunt of Northumber, who is of kin unto King Rens. And that duke, though a mighty warrior, is so evil of appearance and so violent of temper, that I believe that there is not his like for ugliness or for madness of humour in all of the world." Now when King Arthur heard this that the messenger said, he was immediately seized with an extraordinary passion of anger, for his eyes appeared, as it were, to shoot forth sparks of pure light. His face flamed like fire, and he ground his teeth together like the stones of a cairn. Then he immediately rose from the chair where he sat, and went forth from that place. And all those who beheld his anger shuddered at and turned their eyes away from his countenance. Then King Arthur went to an inner room of the castle by himself, and there he walked up and down for a great while. And in that time no one of his household dared to come nigh to him. And the reason of the king's wrath was this, that ever since he had lain wounded and sick nigh unto death in the forest, he bare in mind how Lady Guinevere had suddenly appeared before him like some tall, straight, shining angel, who had descended unto him out of paradise, all full of pity and exceedingly beautiful. Wherefore, at the thought of that wicked, mad Duke Mordaunt of Northumber making demand unto marriage with her, he was seized with a rage so violent that it shook his spirit like a mighty wind. So, for a long while, he walked up and down in his wrath as aforesaid, and no one durst come nigh unto him, but all stood far off, watching him from a distance. Then, after a while, he gave command that Merlin and Sir Ulfius and Sir Kay should come to him at that place where he was. And when they had come thither, he talked to them for a considerable time, bidding Merlin for to make ready to go upon a journey with him, and bidding Sir Ulfius and Sir Kay for to gather together a large army of chosen knights and armed men, and to bring that army straightway to those parts coadjacent to the royal castle of Tintagilon, which same standeth close to the borders of North Wales and of Camelot. So Sir Ulfius and Sir Kay went about to do as King Arthur commanded, and Merlin also went about to do as he commanded. And the next day King Arthur and Merlin, together with certain famous knights of the king's court, who were most approved at arms of all those about him, to wit, Sir Gawain and Sir Owain, who were nephews unto the king, and Sir Pelleas and Sir Geraint, the son of Erbin, set forth for Tintagilon across the forest lands of Ersk. So they travelled for all that day and a part of the next, and that without any adventure or misadventure of any sort. So they came at last to that large and noble castle, hight Tintagilon, which guards the country bordering upon Camelot in North Wales. Here King Arthur was received with great rejoicing, for whithersoever the king went the people loved him very dearly, wherefore the folk of Tintagilon were very glad when he came unto them. Now the morning after King Arthur had come up unto Tintagilon, the summer night having been very warm, he and Merlin were glad to arise betimes to go abroad for to enjoy the dewy freshness of the early daytime. So in the cool of the day they walked together in the garden, which was a very pleasant place, and beneath the shadow of a tall straight tower. And all round about were the many trees with a good shade, where the little birds sang sweetly in the cheerfulness of the summer weather. And here King Arthur opened his mind very freely to Merlin, and he said, Merlin, I do believe that Lady Guinevere is the fairest lady in all the world, wherefore my heart seems to be entirely filled with love for her. And that's such a degree that I think of her continually by day, whether I be eating or drinking or walking or sitting still or going about my business. And likewise I dream of her many times at night. And this has been the case with me, Merlin, ever since a month ago, when I lay sick in that hermit's cell in the forest, what time she came out and stood beside me like a shining angel out of paradise. So I am not willing that any other man than I should have her for his wife. Now, I know very well thou art wonderfully cunning in those arts of magic that may change a man in his appearance so that even those who know him best may not recognize him. Wherefore, I very greatly desire it of thee, that thou wilt so disguise me that I may go, unknown of any man, into Camelot, and that I may dwell there in such a way that I may see the Lady Guinevere every day. For I tell thee very truly that I greatly desire to behold her in such a wise that she might not be in any witting of my regard. Likewise, I would fain see for myself how great may be the perils that encompass King Leodegrace, the king being my right good friend. My lord king, said Merlin, it shall be as thou desirest, and this morning I will cause thee to be so disguised that no one in all the world shall be able to know thee who thou art. So that morning, a little before the prime, Merlin came unto the king where he was, and gave him a little cap. And that cap was such a sort that when King Arthur set it upon his head, he assumed, upon the instant, the appearance of a rude and rustic fellow from the countryside. Then the king commanded that a jerkin of rough frieze should be brought to him, and with this he covered his royal and knightly vestments, and with it he hid that golden collar and his jewel pendant, which he continually wore about his neck. Then, setting the cap upon his head, he assumed at once the guise of that peasant hind, Whereupon, thus being entirely disguised, he quitted Tintagel unknown of any man, and took his way afoot unto the town of Camelot. Now towards the slanting of the day he drew nigh to that place, and lo, he beheld before him a large and considerable town of many comely houses, with red walls and shining windows. And the houses of the town all sat upon a high steep hill, the one overlooking the other, and the town itself was encompassed about by a great wall, high and strong. And a great castle guarded the town, and the castle had very many towers and roofs. And all round about the tower were many fair gardens, and lawns and meadows, and several orchards and groves of trees with thick and pleasing shade. Now at that time of the day the sky behind the tower was all, as it were, an entire flame of fire, so that the towers and the battlements of the castle and the roofs and the chimneys thereof stood altogether black against the brightness of the light. And behold, great flocks of pigeons encircled the towers of the castle in a continual flight against that fiery sky. So, because King Arthur was weary with walking for all that day, it appeared to him that he had hardly ever beheld in all his life so fair and pleasing a place as that excellent castle, with its gardens and lawns and groves of trees. Thus came King Arthur to the castle of Camelot, in the guise of a poor peasant from the countryside, and no man in all the world knew him who he was. So, having reached that castle, he made inquiries for the head gardener thereof, and when he had speech with the gardener, he besought that he might be taken into the service of the part of the garden that appertained to the dwelling place of the Lady Guinevere. Then the gardener looked upon him, and saw that he was tall and strong and well framed. Wherefore he liked him very well, and took him into service even as he desired. And thus it was that King Arthur of Britain became a gardener's boy at Camelot. Now the king was very glad to be in that garden, for in this pleasant summer season the Lady Guinevere came every day to walk with her damsels among the flowers, and King Arthur, all disguised as a peasant gardener boy, beheld her many times when she came thither. So King Arthur abode at that place for above a week, and he took no care that in all that time he enjoyed none of his kingly estate, but was only gardener's boy in the castle garden of Camelot. Now it happened upon that day, when the weather was very warm, that one of the damsels who was attendant upon Lady Guinevere arose all in the early morning whilst the air was still cool and refreshing. So, leaving the Lady Guinevere still sleeping, this damsel, whose name was Maricene of the White Hand, went into the anteroom, and opening of the casement thereof, looked forth into the garden of the roses which adjoined the Lady Guinevere's bower. Now there was at that place a carven marble figure of a youth, holding in his arms a marble ewer, and a fountain of water, as clear as crystal, flowed out from the ewer into a basin of marble. And the figure and the fountain and the marble basin into which the fountain flowed lay beneath the shadow of a linden tree. And all around was a thick growth of roses, so that the place was entirely hidden, saving only from those windows of the castle that were above. So I beheld that as the damsel looked down thitherward out of the window, she beheld a very wonderful sight. For lo! A strange knight kneeled beside the fountain, and bathed his face and bosom in the crystal water thereof. And the damsel saw that the sunlight fell down through the leaves of the linden tree, and lay upon that strange knight. And she perceived that his hair and his beard were of the colour of red gold, shining surpassingly in the brightness of the morning. And she beheld that his brow and his throat and his bosom were white like alabaster, and she beheld that around his neck and shoulders there hung a golden collar of marvellous beauty, so that when the sunlight shone upon it, it flashed like pure lightning. So beholding this strange appearance, as it were a vision, the damsel Maricene stood for a long while, all entranced with wonder and with pleasure, and wist not whether that which she saw was a dream or no dream, nor whether he who sat there was a spirit, or whether he was a man of flesh and blood. Then, by and by, recovering somewhat from her astonishment, she withdrew herself softly from the casement, and, turning about, ran fleetly down the turret stairs, and soon came out thence into that fair and blooming garden at the foot of the tower. She ran through the garden with all speed and silence, and thus came down an alleyway, and to the marble fountain and the linden trees and the rose trees about where she had anon beheld that strange knight bathing himself in the crystal waters. But King Arthur had heard that coming of that damsel, and had speedily set the cap upon his head again, so that when the damsel Maricene came thither, she found no one by the fountain but the gardener's boy. Of him she demanded, "Who art thou, fellow? And why sittest thou here by the fountain?" And unto her he replied, "I am the gardener's lad, who came a short time ago to take service at this place." "Then tell me, fellow," quoth she, "and tell me truly, Who was that young knight who was here beside the fountain but now? And whither hath he gone? Lady, whereon to? He said. There has been no one at this fountain this day, but only I. Nay, fellow, she cried, thou art deceiving me, for I do assure thee that with mine own eyes I beheld but now, where a strange young knight sat bathing himself in the waters of this fountain. And the gardener's boy said, Lady, that which I have told you is the very truth. For indeed, there hath no one been here this morn but only I. Wherefore, and thou deemest thou hast seen any one else, thou art certainly mistaken. At this the damsel set her look upon him in great perplexity. Likewise she marvelled very greatly, for she could not altogether disbelieve him, nor yet could she entirely believe him either, because her eyes had beheld that which she had beheld, and she wotted that she had not been mistaken. Therefore she knew not what to think, and because of her perplexity she felt a very great displeasure at that gardener's boy. Truly, wherefore, she said, if thou art deceiving me, I shall certainly cause thee to suffer a great deal of pain, for I shall have thee whipped with cords. Thereupon she turned and went away from that place, much marvelling at this strange thing, and wondering what it all signified. That morning she told unto the Lady Guinevere all that she had seen. But the Lady Guinevere only laughed at her and mocked her, telling her that she had been asleep and dreaming when she beheld that vision. And indeed the damsel herself began to think that must be the case. Nevertheless, she thereafter looked out every morning from a casement window, albeit she beheld nothing for a great while, for King Arthur came not soon to that place again. So by and by there befell another certain morning, where she looked out of the casement, and lo! there sat that strange knight by the fountain once more as he had aforetime sat. And he bathed his face and his bosom in the waters as he had aforetime done. And he appeared as comely and as noble as he appeared before, and his hair and his young beard shone like gold as they shone before in the sun. And this time she beheld the collar of gold lay upon the brink of the fountain beside him, and it sparkled with great splendour in the sunlight the while he bathed his bosom. Then, after the damsel had regarded him for a considerable time, she ran with all speed to the chamber where the Lady Guinevere still lay, and she cried out in a loud voice, Lady, lady, arouse thee and come with me, for lo, that same young knight who I beheld before is even now bathing himself at the fountain under the linden tree. Then the Lady Guinevere, greatly marvelling, aroused herself right quickly, and, dighting herself with all speed, went with the damsel onto that casement window which looked out into that part of the garden. And there she beheld the young knight where he lathered himself at the fountain. And she saw that his hair and his beard shone like gold in the sunlight, and she saw that his undervestment was of purple linen threaded with gold. And she saw that beside him lay that cunningly wrought collar of gold inset with many jewels of various colours. And the collar shone with a great splendour where it lay upon the marble verge of the fountain. Some while she gazed, exceedingly astonished. Then she commanded the damsel Melusine for to come with her, and therewith she turned and descended the turret stairs, and went quickly out into the garden, as her damsel had done aforetime. Then, as that damsel was done, she straightway hastened with all speed down the alleyway toward the fountain. But behold, when she had come there, she found no young knight, but only the gardener boy, exactly as had happened with the damsel Melusine aforetime. For King Arthur had heard her coming, and had immediately put that enchanted cap upon his head. Then the Lady Guinevere marvelled very greatly to find there was only the gardener's boy, and she wit not what to think so strange a thing. Wherefore she demanded of him, even as Melusine had done, whither had gone the young knight whom she had beheld anon there at the fountain. And unto her the gardener lad made answer as aforetime, Lady, there hath been no one at this place at any time this morning, but only I. Now when King Arthur had donned his cap at the coming of the lady, he had, in his great haste, forgotten his golden collar. And this Guinevere beheld, when it lay shining very brightly beside the margin of the fountain. How now, quoth she, wouldst thou dare to make a mock of me? Now tell me, thou fowl, do gardeners' boys in the land whence thou didst come wear golden collars around their necks, like unto that collar that lieth yonder beside the fountain? Now, and I had thee well whipped, it would be thy rightful due. But take thou that bauble yonder, and give it unto him who it doth rightfully belong, and tell him from me that it doth ill become a truly belted knight, for to hide himself away in the privy gardens of a lady. And turned she with the damsel Melusine, and left she that place, and went back again into her bower. Yet indeed, for all that day, she sat over her broidery. She never did cease to marvel and to wonder how it was possible that a strange young knight should suddenly have vanished away and left only the poor gardener's boy in his stead. Nor, for a long time, she might unriddle that strange thing. Then, all of a sudden, at that time when the heat of the day was sloping towards the cooler part of the afternoon, she aroused herself because of a thought that had come in an instant unto her. So she called the damsel Melusine to come to her, and she bade her to go and tell the gardener's lad for to fetch her straightway a basket of fresh roses for to adorn her tower chamber. So Melusine went and did as she bade, and after considerable time the gardener's lad came bearing a great basket of roses, and lo, he wore his cap upon his head. And all the damsels in waiting upon the Lady Guinevere, when they saw how he wore his cap in their presence, cried out upon him. And Melusine of the White Hand demanded of him, What? How now, Sir boy? Dost thou know so little of what is due upon a king's daughter, that thou dost wear thy cap even in the presence of the Lady Guinevere? Now I bid thee straightway to take thy cap off thy head. And to her King Arthur made answer, Lady, I cannot take off my cap. Quoth the Lady Guinevere, And why canst thou not take off thy cap, thou surly fellow? Lady, said he, I cannot take off my cap, because I have an ugly place upon my head. Then wear thy cap, quoth the Lady Guinevere. Only fetch thou those roses unto me. And so, at her bidding, he brought the roses to her. But when he had come nigh unto the lady, she, of a sudden, snatched at the cap and plucked it off of his head. Then lo! He was upon the instant transformed, for instead of the gardener's boy there stood before the Lady Guinevere and her damsel the appearance of a young knight, with hair and beard like threads of gold. Then he let fall his basket of roses, so that the flowers were scattered all over the floor, and he stood and looked at all who were there. And some of these damsels in attendance upon the Lady Guinevere shrieked, and others stood still from pure amazement, and wist not how to believe what their eyes beheld. But not one of these ladies knew that he whom she beheld was King Arthur. Nevertheless, the Lady Guinevere remembered that this was the knight whom she had found so sorely wounded, lying in that hermit's cell in the forest. Then she laughed and flung him back his cap again. Take thy cap, quoth she, and go thy way, thou gardener's boy who hath an ugly place upon his head. Thus she said, because she was minded to mock him. But King Arthur did not reply to her, but straightway, with great sobriety of aspect, set his cap upon his head again. So resuming his humble guise once more, he turned and quitted that place, leaving those roses scattered all over the floor even as they had fallen. And after that time, whenever the Lady Guinevere would come upon the gardener's lad in the garden, she would say unto her damsel in such a voice that he might hear her speech, Lo, yonder is that gardener's lad who hath an ugly place upon his head, so he must always wear his cap to hide it. Thus she spake openly, mocking him, but privately she bade her damsels to say naught concerning these things, but to keep unto themselves all those things which had befallen.